Hello and welcome to the British Sitcom History What I Call podcast. I am Alan. With me as always is Gareth.
We're recording a podcast, are we?
Doing catchphrases from the show we're talking about, are we?
Oh, pointing out my obvious use of the joke, are we?
Great. Good stuff.
Getting a bit repetitive already, are we?
Yes, we're talking about Miranda today, the sitcom Miranda, written and starring
the person
Miranda Hart, of course, yes. So, end of the season, Gareth. This is the end of our series, and we like to go a little bit more, what I call, and I'm not even using that phrase in that way, but what I call a modern sitcom, which is anything like post-2000, really.
Yeah, well, I think this what years was this? This feels like certainly one of the newer ones that we've done, but it's more than 10 years old, isn't it?
Oh yeah, 2009 the first series went out. The last ones were 1st of January 2015. The last one went out.
The Christmas specials, yeah.
Yes, but its heyday was that 2009 2010.
Yeah. And
yeah, that's a long time ago, isn't it? And actually, one of the interesting things to note here was there was a couple of moments that felt like they'd already aged.
Yeah, that's true.
How quickly things change. But I was thinking that, I'm sort of jumping ahead slightly here, but do you think when we watch something from, say, the 70s, we can kind of go, oh, well, it was a different time, and actually for its time, it wasn't that bad. Whereas, because this is so close, it just feels a little bit more like, oh.
It's just personal experience, Alan. Like we watch Rising Damp, and I don't remember that time. I was just about alive, but I don't remember that. Whereas 2009, I remember, I had a job, I was married, and that was the world that I occupied. And so when something feels a bit outdated, it makes you feel old in a way that the army game doesn't make you feel old, because that's just before my time.
It's just like, so for example, just in the very first episode of Miranda, we have her dealing with being mistaken for a man, and there's a whole kind of this it doesn't really get into it, but things about gender and transvestism specifically, and it wasn't like really offensive or anything, but certainly like I don't think you would write it in that way today. They might have done it, but it would have been done in just the language would have been different, the approach would have been slightly different. There's quite a few things like that in Miranda, and I think it largely feels like it's coming from the right place, and that's kind of why it gets away with it. And
I think, without wanting to be rude about it, Miranda is, she makes a lot of humour from her physical characteristics. She's a large woman, as in she's 6'2" and she's not slender. And you see, I'm desperately trying not to be rude about the woman. But the point is that there's a lot of comedy in Miranda, which is derived from her physical appearance.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that it's the central tenet. Really, it is the whole character arc, such as it is, and the whole character is kind of the ugly duckling. But then rather than the fairy tale ending of like, oh, it turns out you're a swan, it is just like, well, you don't have to be like everyone else.
Ducklings are all
beautiful and unique snowflakes. Yeah, I think that's really the central tenet. And it obviously comes from Miranda Hart herself. That is actually what she looks like in real life. So she's had to deal with that. And her humour largely derives from, I'm going to make the joke before you do. The joke I think you're making behind my back, I'm going to say it.
Yes.
And that's not my speculation. I've heard it in interviews essentially saying words to that effect.
Well, do you think there's an insecurity there then? Because it would be easy to interpret it that way. But my impression of Miranda is that, she's owning it. She's quite comfortable in her skin. But I think perhaps she's someone who's writing as, okay, I'm comfortable in my skin now, but bloody hell, I wasn't.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. I think even within the 5 years of the show, we see the change, and that comes from because Miranda Hart had gone from being a struggling comedian just trying to get ahead to a very successful person, and that obviously gave her some level of confidence within herself as well. And I think we see that change. It's interesting to have a show that's so personal. And we don't want to make the mistake of going, oh, Miranda, the character is Miranda Hart. Obviously it's not. But there's a lot of emotional autobiography there, I think.
Yeah. Well, in our podcasts, we normally spend a lot of time talking about the writers, and we normally spend a lot of time talking about the stars. This is a show built around and by Miranda Hart. So let's talk about her. My memory of this when it came out was that I sort of knew her, but didn't know her very well. She was, like you say, a sort of a comedian. I think she'd been in that, oh my goodness, what was that science fiction sitcom?
Hyperdrive,
thank you, yes. I remember her from that. And I kind of knew her. I was aware of her. But this was the thing that really took off for her, wasn't it?
Mm. She was on the up. So she's obviously quite posh.
Yeah.
She went on Desert Island Discs and picked classical music. Posh.
let me say, I'm going to preempt, because that's the first time in the podcast, but not the first time watching Miranda, that I've got really working class chippy about it. Oh, bloody hell, these people. Like, for example, you know, that shop that they work in. Nobody with a poor background is running a shop like that, are they?
Do you know what? Put that on hold, because I think we're going to hit this several times throughout this episode.
I'm preempting the fact that I'm going to get really chippy throughout this podcast.
Well, her father was an officer in the Navy, and he was an aide-de-camp to the Queen. Is that posh?
I think that's posh.
It's interesting. All her background and stuff, it's all kind of aristocracy adjacent, but without quite being aristocracy themselves, but very kind of
landed
upper
gentry.
Class, lower upper. Miranda Hart Dyke, and is part of this kind of Hart Dyke dynasty. But I also assume connected to there's an actor called John Hart Dyke who was kind of part of the Ray Cooney set. I think there might be some kind of entertainment connections in the family, but I couldn't find any direct connections, so it's probably quite distant. But there's all sorts of things like third cousin twice removed of, Lady Di and all this sort of nonsense. It's all part of that posh set. And she went to boarding school, which is obviously very posh, and that is obviously something that comes through in the Miranda character as well. And I found that very interesting. Miranda, the character, is a bit posh, okay? Yeah. And I find it very interesting that we have that character presented as our hero, our kind of everyman, if you will. And it's interesting to see them strike that balance, because I think it works.
It does work. I think if you look at some of the supporting characters, I don't want to go too deep on them because I know we'll get to them, but Penny, her mum, is irritatingly posh. Tilly, her friend, is obnoxiously posh. And so Miranda, by just being a couple of notches below them, is our everyman.
Yes. And I think that's the what Tilly is there for. It's to show everything that Miranda should be, certainly in the eyes of her mother.
Yes.
And that kind of society that she was brought up in. And so it's this contrapoint to what everything she isn't. But then we, as an audience, go, well, that is a stupid thing. So we're on your side, Miranda.
Yeah.
But they never get deep into that kind of social expectations, really, do they? They never quite... They kind of go, oh, well, I got an inheritance and I bought this shop. So it's like, okay, look, that explains why you're just at a loose end and you're kind of free to do whatever.
Yeah.
As we're going to see, the episode we're going to look at today is Series 1, Episode 3, Job, in which she sort of messes around to get a job. She's the person who gets a job as a joke. It's a kind of a little fun thing she could be doing. Well, what should I do today? Oh, I'll get a job.
Yeah.
I found the more I thought about it, the more it annoyed me.
Yeah.
Because let me set out my stall straight away. Think the show. I found it very funny. Yeah. I found it very enjoyable, very likable. Less so as it went along. We'll talk about that. I'm setting that out now because I think I'm going to be a bit nitpicky and negative as we go along.
Okay. All right.
Because quite like Miranda, the character herself, I feel like the show is using charm and likability to hide some pretty substantial flaws.
Okay.
in its character. So we'll get into
that's
that.
Interesting.
But that's my thesis that I'm working towards.
I kind of agree with that. You know that I don't like physical humour. And
yes,
I am chippy about posh people. And, all the pratfalls in it. I shouldn't like this. On paper, if you describe Miranda to me, I would say, oh, it's not for me. I really like it. Like, it's funny. Yeah. It makes me laugh. And you got to trust in that, haven't you? And I also agree that when I sat down today and watched this episode for the third time, making notes, I got quite annoyed about it. But when I watched it a couple of months ago and just watched it, it was great. It was really good fun.
Yes.
So perhaps the problem is that the show doesn't stand up to scrutiny, the sort of scrutiny that we're going to subject it to. But
yes,
if you just sit down and watch Miranda, in my opinion, it is a great sitcom.
It's fun, yes. And I suspect that we are going to overanalyze it. That's just kind of the nature of what we do.
Yeah.
And some shows are not built to be anything more than a bit of superficial humor and fun. And that is fine. Is this one of them? We'll talk about that. But yeah, let's get back to Miranda Hart.
Tell us about Miranda Hart's story.
Yeah, because I think why Miranda works is because of Miranda Hart and her likability and charm. So yeah, posh schools, university, blah blah blah. Did political science at university actually, more so because that was kind of more acceptable to her parents rather than because she particularly wanted to. Yeah. Was more interested in performing. Ended up doing a lot more of that, stand-up sketches. I got the impression she didn't want to go out doing stand-up like round the clubs kind of circuit.
I certainly don't think of her as a stand-up comedian, but she did. I think of her as a sketch comedian. That's kind of my early memory of her.
Yeah.
But was she stand on stage with a microphone, stand-up comedian?
Yeah. Well? Yeah, she's done a bit of that. I think you've got to, but she was more sketches. But then she ended up in that kind of Edinburgh Fringe set of the 90s, and in that way, when it was still kind of a feasible thing to do. At the same time, where your likes of a Richard Herring is there every year, Sally Phillips is there every year, and we're going to see a lot of these kind of connections. One of her earliest TV credits is Smack the Pony, in which she did some acting, and also there's some writing credits there. So she wrote a couple of sketches. Obviously, there's a Sally Phillips connection there. Then throughout the sort of early 2000s, you're getting she does a guest appearance on Absolutely Fabulous, a guest appearance on Vicar of Dibley. Right. The later end of those shows, and there's definitely Jennifer Saunders is connected to her in some way, like professionally speaking. I mean, I think they saw something of her and went and pushed her a little bit. I think Jennifer Saunders was in her camp at the BBC, going, "Oh, look at this person, look at this person." So definitely there was a bit of a push around her. Obviously, people liked her. They were trying to use her. They were just using her in these little one-scene guest roles. She pops up in Nighty Night. That was 2005.
Yeah, I remember that.
She did a one-off guest appearance on Not Going Out, and they liked her so much that they brought her back for as a series regular, as a totally different character. But she was establishing something. She was building a bit of a reputation. Hyperdrive, which was pretty much co-lead, I think. Nick Frost was kind of the star, the name.
She was Nick Frost's sort of second in command, but she was very very prominent character in it, yeah.
And that's 2006-07. So around that time, 2007, 2008, she got a pilot for a radio show called Miranda Hart's Joke Shop. And this was actually on Radio 2. And it is essentially what became Miranda, the television show.
Yeah.
And it's ultimately the same concept. They did a pilot, which had a slightly different cast. It had Morwenna Banks in as the Stevie role, which makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah. And Alison Steadman as the mother.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Went to series, actually did 4 episodes as the series. It really does feel like a tester. It feels like the BBC going, let's just see what this is. Is there worth something? Is this a TV show? And it's much the same concept with a lot of the same characters. By the time they went to series, they had Tom Ellis and Sarah Hadland in those roles, and Patricia Hodge as well at that point.
Yeah.
The one major difference in the radio cast is the person playing Clive, the guy who runs the cafe, was Jason Watkins, who does turn up in the series
he does,
as Dick Twist at one point, but obviously wasn't available for the show or whatever. So off the back of that, they did a pilot, a non-broadcast pilot of the TV show in 2008, series in 2009. So it ran the whole run of it. You know, it had to do that, and by the time it got to TV show, they dropped the Miranda Joke Shop bit, and they just called it Miranda. Obviously, it's still in a joke shop, but they obviously wanted to broaden out a little bit, I guess. So that's kind of how it came about. She became a big star very suddenly. The show became a big success, but there's 10 years of building up a career before that.
When did it go out? Was it sort of BBC One prime time? I can't remember.
It was BBC Two. The first 2 series are BBC Two.
Okay.
And just looking at the audience numbers there, the first series peaks at 3.14 million.
Okay.
Second series, 4.7 million at its highest.
That's pretty good.
Good stuff. But then the third series, they put it on, it was a couple of years later, it really built up a reputation by then. Yeah. They put it on BBC One, and it doubled the numbers, basically.
Wow. Okay. That's great. No, I was thinking, I know you're going to tell me in a second, but I was thinking, like, what has she done since this? I know she was in Call the Midwife. I've never really watched that, but I know she was in that. That's kind of all I've got. What has she done since?
Yeah, in terms of acting, Call the Midwife is the thing. And it's a little bit more of a serious role, It's a bit...
I'd say I've never watched that. Is it serious? I know it's not a sitcom, but is she not sort of in a humorous role there? Is she proper serious acting?
She's a kind of comedy-ish character in that, relatively speaking, yeah. But... yeah, there's nothing obvious. I think she makes a good living from being Miranda Hart. And she can do...
What do you mean? How do you monetize being Miranda Hart? What's she doing? Personal appearances, opening supermarkets? What are you on about?
She's better than that.
When I was a kid, I remember going to at Skegness, going to an amusement arcade opening, and I've still got a photo of me at about 6 years old with Ted Rogers and Dusty Bin. That's how you monetize fame, mate. Is that what Miranda's doing?
She did do a big stand-up tour, and she did a stand-up DVD and all that, filmed at the O2. You know, it was
when was
massive
that? Was that during the
2014? Yeah.
Oh, so at the end of it.
So
okay.
Yeah, I mean, massive. That's a nice little money spinner. We'll talk about this later, but they've recently done an American version of Miranda, in which she must be getting a back end of that. So. Sure. That's financially speaking. She's written a few books. You know, she wrote a book about...
You just said the back end of that. I had the urge to look at my camera and go, don't. Because I've been watching Miranda for the last 3 weeks.
She did manage to get in a musical, as she always seems to aspire to. She played Miss Hannigan in Annie.
And in this musical, was she singing?
Yeah, I guess it's Annie, you know, she's
that is interesting.
You know.
I did have a question, because, you know, she obviously sings from time to time in the show, whether that was her real singing voice or if she was having to artificially make it that bad.
Well, I did see an interview with her where she basically said, yeah, she wants to be a West End star, but she can't sing or dance, so it was like a dream. But then, you know, get famous enough to get the job anyway.
Yeah.
I'm an ordinary woman with feelings. I'd like a man to nibble on me, but I'll admit no man has been. So how come I'm the mother of the year?
But yeah, what has she been doing the last 6-7 years? I don't know, because she writes books. I think she started writing fiction books now, but
I mean, you can't just say, "Oh, she writes books." That takes time. That's what she's doing. Then, okay, that's the answer to the question. She's writing books.
Yeah, but she wrote a book about like life with her dog.
Oh God, your face! Oh, dismissive. Oh, God.
Yeah, I mean, look. I mean, I do quite like Miranda Hart, but that's definitely points off the respect list if you write a book about your dog.
So I don't think we're quite saying she's disappeared into the wilderness, but look, from a sitcom point of view, this is definitely the peak of her career in terms of, well, there's been no sitcom action since.
No, but it's interesting, you know, obviously this is a sitcom, but is she a sitcom actor? You can just drop into anything, or is she...
No, I mean, she's Miranda Hart.
This is her persona. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. But then, you know, look at Call the Midwife, obviously she can play a character.
I mean, Ricky Gervais has managed it, hasn't it?
Yeah. Do you know what? Let's jump into an episode.
Let's talk about our episode. So we are looking at Series 1, Episode 3, Job. We start, as we do in every show, with this sort of cold open, before any titles or anything. We got Miranda sat on her couch, talking to us. So why don't we talk about this technique of breaking the fourth wall, engaging with the audience? It's not the first time it's ever been done, but I think it is integral to this show.
It is, yeah. And a cold opening like this, we saw it quite recently. Jim Davidson does it in Up the Elephant Round the Castle. Yeah. But he does not then break once you're into the story.
Jim Davidson couldn't manage to look at the camera. He was always looking at the wrong camera, do you remember? At least Miranda's got eyes on the red light. We're all good.
But it feels like they did that because Jim Davidson's a stand-up. Let's play to his strengths because he's not an actor. And then, you know, he wasn't that good at that. But with Miranda, it's much more integral to what they're doing, but you do see it as a conduit for her kind of stand-up material.
I think it's engaging. I think it's crucial to why this sitcom works. As I said earlier, on paper it shouldn't work, but I like it. I feel I'm engaged, and I think that's because she's talking to me. She's keeping me involved. I know that sounds a bit silly, but I really do believe that involvement of the audience in the world is crucial to Miranda's success, to how this works.
Yes. I think that direct line between you and Miranda creates a relationship.
I think it creates warmth. I think it makes, like I said, these are all posh people. I've got a chip on my shoulder about posh people, and I shouldn't like them. They should all be irritating me, and sometimes they do. But I'm on Miranda's side. I'm her friend. I'm part of the group.
I agree. But I want to talk about specifically the opening monologues.
Okay.
which is used as a way to bring the audience in, yes. It's also used as a way to do a few flashback gags.
Little sketches,
like
cutaways.
scenes.
Do you know what it made me think of? Family Guy. Family Guy does this all the time. They'll say a little phrase and then you get the 3-second animation of whatever they were talking about. It's exactly the same as that.
It's not common in sitcom, though.
No, absolutely not. Because that's expensive. Like, throughout this episode, there's a whole cutaway of her in a Royal Navy interview. Who's the interviewer? I knew his face. Who's he?
Dan Tetzel.
Dan Tetzel, that's right, yes. There's a cutaway of her at school galloping instead of running. Mm-hmm. All of those things, all those scenes needed to be filmed and staged and the actors hired and the sets dressed. And, I think that's why it's unusual, because it's extra expense, isn't it?
It is, yeah, all location shooting as well. But from a structural point of view, it's unusual. And I'll tell you why I don't like it. Okay, and it's going to lead into some other thing. And there's a certain matter of personal taste here. If you look at contemporary people talking about Miranda at the time, there's a lot of like, oh, it's a return to good old-fashioned traditional sitcom, right?
Oh, really?
Because it was very unfashionable at Post Office. It was very unfashionable to have this kind of audience sitcom. It was all very one-camera setup. And, that never went away. It's all been a bit overdone, overblown with that kind of death of the sitcom vibe. And certainly now we have it a lot more. But there was this Post Office period where they're like, oh, God, we can't do that old-fashioned sitcom where it looks so kind of crap. And so Miranda is really credited as being one of the ones that really brought it back. And certainly the success of this show would have given the BBC comfort.
I want to challenge that, though, because I mean, I understand what you're saying. The Office, this is not. But it's also not Dear John. It's that fourth wall breaking it completely changes the style of the show. I know it's a studio sitcom, but yeah, there are outside external locations. There's cutaway scenes. I don't think this feels like a traditional sitcom. It feels like the modern twist on a traditional sitcom after The Office.
Well, I'll tell you why it started to niggle me as we went along, because for my concept, the traditional sitcom is essentially a live recording of a 30-minute play in front of an audience. Yeah. It's not going to be perfectly that, but, as much as possible. Yeah. And that's not what Miranda is, because Miranda has these cutaways. It has all this stuff that don't really work in a live environment. And I know they just have screens in front of the audience and they play the cutaway, right? Fine. You're still getting an audience response. You're still getting it's all in the flow of it. But then there's lots of other things in the show that affect that. It's in the editing. A lot of things where we go from one scene to another and it's the next day and it's a whole costume change. We're in a different location. Things like that, which just don't work in a live environment because everyone has to stop for 15 minutes while they go off, they get changed, they come back, they reset the camera. And that started to bother me more and more as it went along. Other things I noticed, like the editing, where there's definitely just like, oh, there's been a few seconds gone there. You could just tell with the edit, it was like, oh, something's been cut out there. Maybe a line that didn't quite land or something, or they just chose to take it out. But then in the flow of it, it just started to jump out at me. Just little elements like that just started to make me kind of go, I don't think this would be a very good live experience to watch.
I think you might be right about that, but I would challenge that. I think what you're expressing, you said there's a personal taste, and that's fine. People like different things, that's fine. But tell you what I'm thinking about, Only Fools and Horses, where they're in the stately home banging the chandelier out the ceiling. That would have been played to an audience in a studio on a screen, and they would have laughed at it. That's not a unique experience. The difference here is that there are these short cutaway scenes rather than what was a longer scene. Surely that's better. That's more effective. It's just a cutaway and we're back.
But this show still has location shooting, though. It still has those.
That is true.
And that's a kind of an inevitability of wanting to expand your stories, unless you're going to go real purist with it, like Victoria Wood in Dinner Ladies, which has no location shooting at all, which is great.
Great for you.
Yeah. But, we accept that as a kind of reality of it, and they're going to show it to the audience, and then it comes back and like, oh, yeah, they're back in the house, whatever. Mm-hmm. But this just feels very stop-start. I guess that's kind of what my point is. Yeah. And let's get down to the real fundamental thing. Miranda connects directly to the audience. She looks to the audience, and we have a connection with her. But she's not looking to the audience. She's looking to a camera.
Yeah.
As a TV watcher, that works, and it's being made for that, so that's fine. But I'm just saying, as a live experience, it's suddenly, there's this slight disconnect there.
But the audience feel engaged. We talk a lot in this podcast about overreactions of audiences, and you think, God, who's hyped them up? Felix Bones did a good job today, But this audience feel really engaged. You know, there are moments of oohs and ahs and big applauses. It's almost like an American sitcom, you know, there's that kind of whooping type thing going on. And, you know, at the very end of we'll get to the final Christmas specials at the end. The very end of it, she comes over to the camera and says goodbye to her friends.
Mm.
And she gets emotional, and she appears to mean it.
Yeah, I got emotional about that end as well. And I didn't particularly love the episode or anything.
No, I was sick of it by then, but I still had a little cry at the end.
And on the DVD, there's a bit of there's a kind of behind the scenes bit, and they are all emotional. It's the last time they're all going to be together. This family that they've been working with for 5-6 years, an audience that they have really engaged with. We'll come on to the ending a bit later on, but I wanted to address the audience issue there, because yes, it's a live audience thing. You're getting a live audience reaction, but your oohs and your ahs, this is what I'm talking about with that kind of artifice of the live performance, because I'll give you an example. The episode where the bottle episode where her and the mother are in the psychiatrist's office with Mark Heap.
Mark Heap, yeah.
There's a scene where Gary suddenly bursts in, declares his love for her and proposes. Woo, yeah, woo. Audience is going crazy. Smash cut to, boom. Oh, it's imaginary. She's stood there. He's not there. She's imagining it. The mother goes, What are you doing, Miranda? Everyone goes, oh.
Yeah.
How can that response be real when they say, cut? Okay, Tom Ellis, you can step out now, thank you. Okay, audience, we're about to reshoot and Miranda is going to be stood here with no one there. It doesn't make any sense, right?
No,
that awe is added in, okay? I'm not, there's no laugh track here, but the awe is obviously added in. They've probably taken it from something that was a genuine response or whatever, but...
Oh, you don't have to ruin the magic, Alan.
Well, here's the other thing that ruins it for me. There is a live audience there. We're getting a live laugh track. This is not a fake laugh track. But it doesn't feel genuine. And I couldn't quite put my finger on why that was. It's something to do with the editing and the flow of the scenes. It didn't feel like the actors were responding to the laughs. The laughs kind of grow and then gently come off just in time for the next line. And that feels unnatural. And so when I'm watching that, it feels like a fake laugh track.
You?
No, still single.
Me too.
You just said you were married.
Divorced now.
And the kids?
Dead.
Really? What happened?
I know what you're saying. I remember when we watched Sorry and we talked about Ronnie Corbett really working the laugh and his timing being perfect.
Exactly.
There were a couple of times watching Miranda where they seemed to... I know exactly what you're saying. I hadn't written it down as a note, but as soon as you said it, I recognised that, yes.
And so it might work better as a TV show. Maybe that's the idea. And basically what really brought that to bear for me, when I was watching the DVD, some of the extras, there were outtakes.
Yeah.
And on the outtakes, obviously they're getting big laughs because something went wrong, so it's kind of everyone's laughing. But you can tell that the audience is in the room. You can hear them in the room.
You?
No, still single.
Me too.
You just said you're married.
Divorced now.
And the kids?
Dead.
When you get to the end product that's been sound mixed and produced, it feels like a separate track, which it is. It obviously has been separated, and then you can manipulate it. You can dip it and bring it down in time for the next line. And I don't like that. It's not the problem of Miranda, the show. It was the style of the BBC at that time. I don't quite know what they're doing now, but that was the house style, and I don't like it. For a show like Miranda, particularly, that is really trying to engage with an audience, it's a detriment.
See, that's interesting. This is where you sort of bring some technical expertise to bear, because I hadn't noticed any of that. To me, as a layman watching, I felt like the audience were engaged. So I'm not arguing. I'm not saying that you're wrong, but I didn't read it that way. I didn't see that, hear that. Well, look, I tell you what. Let's say we've got a bit techie there. Why don't we go back to our episode? So we've had the little cold open. Let's talk now about the actual opening titles.
First thoughts, very basic and cheap.
Yeah, no, you're right there. But very sort of, there's like a jaunty tune, and it's Miranda holding photographs of herself as a kid, as a teenager. Basically just, look, this is Miranda, she was a gawky kid. Now, look at her now. She's a gawky adult. That's basically the gist of it.
Yeah, which is all right, isn't it? I don't want to read too much in. That is an opening credits that was thrown together. You know, the filming of that took 20 minutes. The editing took a bit longer. But it's not. It's a very simple, basic thing. And that's okay. I think that's fine.
I don't read that much into it. I don't know how important it is. If there was just a still card that said Miranda for a second and a half, and then in we go, does it really matter?
No, not necessarily. But I think this speaks to the time. I think in the 70s you have a 30, 40 second long intro with the actors' names and everything. You can't do that in 2009. People are going to turn off. They go straight on to the next thing. Grab them quickly, get them in. And then credits is just there just to say hello, really. Okay,
so the opening scene, we are in the shop. There's almost a scene setting here where we have Stevie as the serious one, Miranda as the silly one. And that's kind of what this scene is establishing. So here is where I've made notes about only really privileged people can be this frivolous. Okay. And, I don't want to come over all Jarvis Cocker, but she'll never understand how it feels to live her life, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But I actually think that the set is kind of perfect for the character because it does spell out this frivolous life. It's a joke shop. It's full of nothing useful. It's just all complete tat, all disposable stuff. And that's kind of her life, isn't it? It's just all disposable tat.
Yeah, it's a joke. Life's a joke. That's the metaphor they're not particularly straining for here. Okay, so she lives an easy life. She doesn't have to worry about money. So straight away, that's kind of one of our major concerns that most people could identify with is gone.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this before, that the sitcoms used to be working class, right? That's how it was. On the Bus is Steptoe and Son, right? It's working people in their lives. And that has become less and less so as we've gone along into the 90s and 2000s particularly.
Do you think there's a parallel here with the creators and the actors, in that we hear a lot now that it's very difficult to get into acting from a working class background because you need to have some financial backing?
Yes.
I'm thinking about writers. I'm thinking about, was it Johnny Spate who was a carpenter and he sort of just gave someone a script and got his way in that way?
That was John Sullivan.
John Sullivan, yes. Sorry, yes. But Johnny Spate wasn't a bloody Viscount's son, was he? There were all those old
Johnny
boys
Spate
were
was John
working
Sullivan's inspiration because he heard that this working class guy was writing for the BBC.
So all those old working class writers that found their way in, and I'm conscious as I'm saying this that they were all blokes, so that is something that's changed. But Miranda is not of that ilk, is she?
Well, like I say, like we're saying, Miranda built this career throughout the late 90s, early 2000s of, going to Edinburgh, doing a sketch comedy, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you can't do that if you're working 40 hours a week in a shop, right? You can't do it. You just haven't got the time, you haven't got the resources, you haven't got the creative energy, you haven't got the money to go to Edinburgh. Yeah. It was a bit different in the 90s. It was affordable. Nobody goes to Edinburgh anymore. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's just my own personal gripe there. I have no problem with people kind of using the privilege they had to use it. If you got it, it's more wasteful to not use it, right? But my point is, if you're the BBC and looking at what audience is this going to attract, you've got to take a wider view of that. Not even because, we're the BBC and we want to serve all masters, but because, we need to make sure we've got an audience for this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can't make a posh sitcom because no one's going to watch it. Or mind you, To the Man
of Born. Yeah. But I think that's aspirational. I think you watch To the Man of Born, you're not really supposed to like those people. They're like, they're the toffs. Whereas when it's a bit closer in class, then that's where you can get a little bit resentful.
But I think it's just that demographic has expanded so much in the last 30 years. That demographic that I'm in, that kind of working class background, but went to university and kind of came out and goes, well, I'm supposed to be doing things I love, not things for the money.
And might go into a daft shop and buy a bag of penis pasta for a birthday present. I get what you're saying. That perhaps does represent a change in society. Yes.
But yeah, we do have an interesting dynamic here between Miranda and Stevie.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this. Well, I know in terms of the original radio show, the character of Stevie is originally envisioned as the opposite of Miranda, the officious, serious, I'm working hard vibe, and we do kind of get that in the earlier episodes.
Yeah, and then they just become mates, don't they? They just become.
She just becomes her sidekick.
Yeah, that's the right word.
No, I've been doing an excellent expenditure chart.
Oh, yeah, that is good. Yeah. Talk me through it.
Really?
No!
We also get the first appearance of the Heather Small thing. What have you done today to make me feel proud? Which I remember being very funny when I first saw it.
What about the 7th time?
Kind of sick of it by the end.
It does start to wear, doesn't it?
Like, without jumping ahead too far here, that is a theme. There's some very funny jokes in here, but by the time I'd watched 3 series and 2 specials, I was really sick of those jokes.
That's a good example because I think, throwing up Heather Small and go, what have you done today to make me feel proud? Funny, joke. If in the next episode she throws up a different pop star and sings a different lyric which was relevant to whatever they're talking about, run the same joke but make it different and make it interesting rather than just doing the same thing.
I remember recently we talked about the Fast Show, didn't we? I can't remember which episode it was, but we talked about the Fast Show, how yes, it's the same punchline over and over again, but it's a different build-up, it's a different setup, and you're kind of waiting for the punchline, but the getting there is the fun. I don't think Miranda does that. I think it's just the same joke over and over again. And, what I call repetitive.
Yes, I agree. Yes. Let's talk about Sarah Hadland briefly.
Yeah, I can tell you where I recognised her from.
Oh, yeah?
She was in Mitchell and Webb's sketch show, wasn't she? She was one of their sort of sidekicks.
She was at that time knocking about in this comedy world. So perhaps not that surprising that she dropped on a kind of a major role eventually. She actually started out in musical theatre when she was young. Kind of that was her early point, and then sort of transitioned into more acting, but voice work, and still does a lot of voice work today. That seems to be kind of her bread and butter. And this began as a radio show, so that kind of adds up, right?
Yeah.
But around that time, Peep Show. She's in an episode of Peep Show. She's in an episode of Green Wing. Quite a lot of Green Wing connections in this world as well. Saxondale. She's in an episode of that. The IT Crowd, she's quite a notable one, guest in that. All just like one episode here and there. And then she was in the Mitchell and Webb sketch show, around the same time as this. The one regular thing I found her in was a show called Moving Wallpaper. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh gosh, that name rings a bell. Is that a sketch show?
No, it was a sitcom-y kind of thing, but it was supposed to be behind the scenes of a soap opera.
Oh, I do remember it. It was like there were 2 shows where you actually saw the show and then the background. I don't think I ever watched that, but I remember it because it was quite an innovative idea.
Yeah, that was the one thing I found that she had sort of a regular role in before Miranda. And nothing obvious since either, like in terms of a regular job. Still just knocking around, working, and a lot of voice work.
I do like Stevie. I like the character. As you say, I think she kind of degenerates. She evolves as time passes to be just a sort of a minor Miranda. But I like this idea of a foil of her being, as you said, the opposite of Miranda.
I think if the one thing the show needs later on, as it goes on, is more conflict.
Yeah,
a bit of pushback on Miranda, because then Miranda can push back, and that creates drama, it creates comedy situations. I think it starts to lose that as it goes along.
There's another thing that happens in this scene, which is a recurring motif, which is that they'll engage a customer. They'll get a customer involved in their discussion or argument or whatever it is they're up to. And like later on, Dominic Coleman, he's a sort of recurring guest star who he becomes that customer.
Yeah, that's a kind of a weird thing. I want to talk about that.
Yeah, it's very odd. Earlier on, it's just whoever happens to be in the shop. I've got to tell you, as a man who's worked in shops for a long time, that bothers me. It's not good service, is it? It's not good customer service.
She's very rude to people.
She's very rude to people. It reminded me, there's a couple of times actually where the setup here, where you've got a shop and the restaurant next door, it reminds me of Black Books quite a lot. Where I don't know what Bernard Black's situation is, but he obviously doesn't need the revenue from that bookshop, does he? so it kind of reminded me of that a little bit.
Before we go on, though, actually, in this scene, that shop and the stairs and everything, does it look familiar?
It does, but you're going to have to tell me why.
It is recycled set from another show. It is the kitchen set from Absolutely Fabulous.
Yes! Okay, yes, I can see them
with the
stumbling
stairs
down
at the
the
back
stairs.
Going up the top there.
Yes,
yeah, it is, and
that's
it is
really
exactly the same set that they just reused. I didn't spot that myself, but it was noted on one of the extras because Miranda Hart was quite excited about it, obviously because Absolutely Fabulous. It was something she was brought up on, her comedy heroes.
So next up, Penny arrives. Penny is Miranda's mum.
Listen, Tilly, outside, promotion. Her mother gloating, you, fake job, big success.
So I think you dropped some verbs on the way in.
Verbs. On the way in, she's just got her. I said you'd got her to pretend you're your father and me wish you were.
Which I think is quite clever wordplay, actually. And that's something that isn't repeated. Like, she has her such fun catchphrase and the what I call repetitive catchphrase, that one.
Mm.
But that little affectation of no verbs, then the verbs, I quite enjoyed that. And that felt like a one-off.
It was just a one-off, and they don't get a lot of wordplay in that sense. That, although we'll talk about this in a second with the character of Tilly as a kind of wordplay character. Mm-hmm. But yeah, let's talk about the mother, eh? Yeah.
What a horrendous person.
Yeah, well, we all know, is a well-known fact that everyone's problems stem directly from their mother.
Yeah.
So this is really... This is really something everyone can relate to, I think. This
I have to say,
divides.
If I was Miranda Hart's mother, I would not have enjoyed watching this show.
Well, it's funny you should say that. One of the DVD extras, is an interview with her mother.
Oh yeah,
and asks her that, and she, she's obviously very proud of her daughter and everything. But she does say, yeah, people expect me to be like this character, and I'm not. But I think Miranda Hart herself also suffered from the same thing. People expected her to be like Miranda. And she's not. Obviously it is an exaggerated version of her persona, but it's not really what she is.
Yeah.
And particularly she noted that people expect her to be nice and charming, and she can't be bothered with that.
That's good.
But yeah, so the relationship between Miranda and her mother is probably the most important one in the show, ultimately. And spoiler alert, at the end, kind of the final blossoming of Miranda is standing up to her mother and saying, look, you're not in charge of me, I'm doing my own thing. That is literally, and it's not subtle, they pretty much spell it out. Yeah. That is what gives her the release to be able to go and kind of live her own life.
Yeah.
It feels a bit harsh at the end, because by the time we got to that point, Patricia Hodge, as the mother character, has become a bit more kind of daffy and likable and silly, rather than this overbearing, what I call Phyllis Lumsden.
What about the actress? Patricia Hodge is... Well, she's sitcom royalty, isn't she?
Well, Patricia Hodge, as opposed to the character she's playing here, was much more of that kind of 1950s aspiring middle class. She was a grammar school girl and trained as a teacher, which was the height of ambition for working class kids back then. She did train as a teacher, but then ended up going to Lambda when she was 22, and so got into musical theatre particularly. And we see a little bit of that in the character when she starts dancing and singing. It's always a little bit more refined than Miranda can do it. Mm-hmm. She's actually got multiple Olivier Award nominations. Won one of them. She's pretty legit as these go. Her TV breakthrough was Rumpole of the Bailey.
Okay,
that's kind of what she was known for. That was in the late 70s, but ran a long time. Sitcom then. First thing I could find was The Other Half. The Other Half. So she was a regular in that, or at least a semi-regular. That was written by Dick Clement and Neil LaFrennay. Mm-hmm. The year after that, 1980, or the same time, she was a lead in Holding the Fort.
Yes, which we've seen,
which we've talked about. Marks and Gran wrote that. We talked about that in our Newt Statesman episode.
Her husband was Peter Davidson, and he was the house husband. Imagine such a thing.
She
went out to work like as if she was a man.
And the only other regular sitcom thing I found on her CV was Legacy of Reginald Perrin.
Oh, okay. That's before the Martin Clunes remake.
Yeah. It was a direct continuation of the Leonard Rossiter one, but Leonard Rossiter was dead. It's like the idea is that Reginald Perrin has died, and in his will he's stipulated certain things. And that hence hilarity ensues, and there's it's not very good. But Patricia Hodge was the lawyer in that, so she was in every episode. She was the one dealing with the family and all these actors who we already knew. She was like the new person in the show. Yeah, Patricia Hodge, have to make her a dame any minute now, surely. That kind of eligibility. She's getting to an age where she can be a dame. Definitely the biggest name in this show in terms of the cast.
I'd say she's the only name, apart from Miranda, perhaps, who had any cachet before this wouldn't have been made. Perhaps that's a little unfair to Sally Phillips. In fact, let's talk about Sally Phillips now, because back to our scene, we've had Penny come in, warning that Tilly's about to arrive, and she's got this new job, and sure enough, Tilly does arrive. And immediately, we are greeted with Tilly's shall we say, idiosyncratic speech patterns, which I find quite infuriating. So she comes in and she says,
Congratulations, Queen Kong. It sounds spectacular.
Yes, it's fabby fun.
And what a surprise, Flabbergastamumu.
first of all, Miranda's nickname from school was Queen Kong, which, again, sort of funny, but really unkind. And, the way that she speaks, the way that the character speaks is meant to be irritating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is. Now, as the series progresses, it gets worse and worse and worse. And it's like compound interest on how annoying it is. It's getting more annoying because I'm sick of it, and you're laying it on even thicker. Pack it in.
I quite like it. But I like Tilly as a character, but it's a character that needs to drop in and drop out. One scene,
they use
two,
more,
three
they use her a lot more
episodes
later
a
on.
series. She does become much more of a character later on, and I'm not quite sure it's strong enough to hold that up to the point where they have to kind of change the character. Again, she is supposed to be, in the same way that Stevie is, she is an opposite to Miranda. She's everything that Miranda should be. And to have that as an antagonist is great. Every social event my mother takes me to, she's there proving that I'm not right. That's what
and there's
it should
that kind of, you know, there's the sort of dreadful air kiss that they have. And there's this kind of hostility between them where they're so friendly, they're overbearingly friendly to each other, but they appear to really hate each other. But that disappears. That disappears later. They become friends, and that
and I think that's
bite.
I think that's wrong. Yeah, I think that's not a good idea. I think that is a symptom of someone enjoying working with a friend and wanting to put them in their show more. and I understand that, but it's not necessarily the best thing.
I will say this though, as annoying as the character is, I think Sally Phillips' performance is brilliant. She does a terrific job.
Well, look, Sally Phillips is pretty terrific in everything. But she's been around for years, right? She's part of the Oxford set, right? She did go to boarding school, so it's kind of like it fits with this character. She's obviously drawing from experience in the same way that Miranda is. So great casting in that sense. Went up to Oxford, joined the Oxford Review, met Lee and Herring and all that. Did all the Edinburgh stuff with all them, and kind of came up through that crowd. That means she's in with the Iannucci set. So she's in I'm Alan Partridge, a really memorable role in I'm Alan Partridge.
Brilliant in that, yeah.
Famously, she's in Cows, the Eddie Izzard failed pilot.
Is she?
She's one of the cows. No, she's not one of the cows. She's the human love interest who is kind of in the world of cows. Hippies, which was a short-lived thing with Simon Pegg. It's kind of this world again.
So actually, Sally Phillips is sitcom royalty.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, she's in so many sitcoms as a guest and things that I stopped writing notes about them. There's too many. I was just trying to get the highlights. But Smack the Pony was probably the breakthrough in terms of like, oh yeah, these guys are there. We know who these people are. More recent things I noticed. She was in one series of Trolleyed, which is that Sky show that we keep mentioning, but no one's ever seen it.
I've still never seen it. No,
no one has. But there's lots of people in it. And she is, of course, because of that Iannucci connection, I guess, she's been a regular, well, kind of once a series guest on
Veep. That very memorable role. She plays the former Finnish Prime Minister, I think. She steals the scene in every scene she's in, which, you know, when you're with Julie Louise-Dreyfus, that's quite something.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like this character is too small for her, because you think if you've got Sally Phillips, you're going to be a regular every episode, which she does kind of become. But I think from a character point of view, it would benefit from being in less. We would see less of her. And she should be an antagonist. She should be a thorn in the side.
All right, so in the scene then, we get a who's on first base type joke.
Yeah, a bit more wordplay, actually. Yeah, this is very wordplay heavy, this one.
But that went on too long. I didn't like that very much. And then what we've got here is Miranda pretending that she works in television. And this is a real theme of the show, where Miranda will tell a lie and then end up in a situation because she holds onto the rising balloon and will not let go and say, oh no, that was just a lie. And so we end up in these extreme situations. There's another episode, I think it's the following episode actually, where she just goes to stay in a hotel to get away from her tough life of doing nothing. And she ends up pretending to be someone else because she's after a free meal. And she ends up accidentally delivering a presentation or something. I can't remember. But there are at least 20 occasions on which she could have just said, actually, I'm not that person. And I understand that's not how comedy works. I get it. But that is a real theme of the show where she ends up in a situation because she's told a little lie and then got trapped in it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think this is also the symptom of it's starting to get repetitive after 20 episodes.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, Miranda trades on the comedy of social awkwardness.
Mm-hmm.
We all been there. We've all been in that situation where someone pushes you in front of the queue and you want to say something, but you don't. Mm-hmm. And Miranda just sort of vocalizes that and then would kind of go about some convoluted way of trying to get ahead of them in the queue or something, you know.
Yeah.
It is very relatable, I think, for everybody. Well, that's all for this week. We've run out of time. Sorry. But next week, we will be continuing along with our very in-depth look at Miranda. Lots more interesting conversations to be had, and we will deal with that tricky third series slump. And there'll even be a discussion of the techniques of clown that are presented in Miranda. In the meantime, do get in touch. We are social media savvy here at the British Sitcom History Podcast. Oh yes. Go to Instagram or Twitter at BritcomPod to find us. And we're on Facebook. Search for British Sitcom History Podcast. You'll find us there. Lots of people commenting on things. It's interesting conversations. That's all for now. We will see you next week. Thank you very much for listening and goodbye.